We're celebrating today having over 100 subscribers. Let's go. I want to give a shout out to all my viewers out there, especially my first subscribers who kept encouraging me, and even though my videos weren't very good, and encourage me and make me better. Shout out to all my latest subscribers. I hope you're enjoying the content. Make sure that if you do like that content, like, subscribe, comment, ring that bell for notifications. Let's keep it growing. I want to shout out Gigi the cat, my support animal. Where is she? Oh, you're adorable. Let's go. Shout out to shout out to all the haters out there who are saying that my videos were no good, proving you wrong. Let's go. All right, enough shout outs. Can't rest on our laurels, staying humble. I'm not going to let this fame and fortune go to my head. Let's get you right with some what you're here for. You're not here for that. You're here for that knowledge, that A-push knowledge. Let's go. This is the second half of chapter 23. It's about the 1920s, the jazz age, with that great poem at the beginning. This is going to be a huge episode, you guys. A lot of stuff in here. So let's just get straight into it. It's a new culture. It's the beginning of the modern era. And the new culture is urban. Urban means city. It's a culture of cities. City culture was based on mass consumption or consumerism, buying things. This is at odds with the strict religious and moral codes of rural America. And this idea of being frugal, the Protestant work ethic, not having too much stuff. The jazz age, it's phonographs. That's record players for all y'all out there. It's radios. Youth could listen to jazz, a distinctly African American style of music brought north by the African Americans during the Great Migration and the Harlem Renaissance. It encapsulated the energetic and youthful spirit of the age, the freedom of the age. Entertainment. On the radio, you had two major channels, NBC and CBS. Those should sound familiar to you. They're the National Broadcasting Channel and Columbia Broadcasting System. Oh, don't quote me on that. And then in the 1920s, they also created the movie industry. Hollywood becomes an actual thing where they make movies, and movie stars become movie stars. Popular heroes, instead of political figures, like, how people used to worship George Washington and name their kids George after George Washington. Not anymore. Now political figures don't matter. It's a focus on sports and movie stars. For example, Jim Thorpe was a famous football player, American-style football player, and Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT, was hitting home runs all day, every day. Probably the most famous hero of the 1920s was none other than Lucky Lindy or Charles Lindbergh. He flew his airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean all by himself. It was the first transatlantic to New York City to Paris flight. He was given a hero's welcome both in Paris and also when he returned home. Gender roles, family, and education. Women, despite the 19th Amendment, they remained largely their gender roles remained largely unchanged. Revolution morals, a revolt against sexual taboos and greater promiscuity. Ooh, promiscuity. Flappers, a special fashion for young women. It showcased their desire for independence. They wore short skirts without bustles, hemmed at the knee, showing off their whole entire leg. Scandalous, I tell you, scandalous. And then they cut their hair short, which was just crazy. Like, long hair used to be like the symbol of, like, the epitome of feminine beauty and luxury was to have really, really long hair. But they just chopped it all off. This was known as a bobbed haircut. They smoked cigarettes, drove cars, danced to jazz music, and also drank alcohol in speakeasies. Divorce. Liberalized divorce laws make it easier to get divorced. By the end of the 1920s, 1 in 6 marriages end in divorce. Right now, I think it's currently 1 in 2, so 50%, just to give you some idea. And then universal high school education became the goal, so it wasn't just elementary school learning your 3 R's. It was all the way through high school. Literature of alienation. Ooh. Literature just means books. Alienation means, being foreign, feeling not in place. This comes from the disillusionment of the lost generation. Writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, and Ernest Hemingway, who wrote The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and then T.S. Eliot, they expressed disdain disdain for materialism and consumerism of business-oriented culture. So while everyone's living fast and dying young and buying stuff to become happy, their art reflected a disdain of these things, and looked for something more, but didn't really offer an answer to the solution. Most of it was, they didn't propose an answer except, well, it was all very depressing. If you don't believe me, just read Ernest Hemingway. Anything by Ernest Hemingway is just, I don't know. Go ahead and read it. All right. Anyways, art and or you can ask me later. Put it in the comments or something. Art and architecture, industrial designers, Art Deco, streamlined aesthetic appeal in all sorts of things. Painters, Edward Hopper, focused on the loneliness and isolation of early art, kind of reflecting the disillusionment of the lost generation of writers, right? So he'd make these paintings that hey, stop it, cat. Sorry about that. This is Comfort Animals trying to scratch the back of the chair. Yeesh. Gonna have to edit that out of the video. What time frame is that? 6:20. All right. All right, and stage, Jewish composer George Gershwin blended jazz and classical music in his famous Rhapsody in Blue. There you go. The Harlem Renaissance. Harlem was a section of New York City. There's 5 boroughs of New York City. Harlem is one of them. A large number of African Americans moved there, creating an African American community, and it became famous for African American actors, artists, musicians, and writers. So one of the most famous ones was Langston Hughes, who wrote poetry, among other things, like I Too Sing America. And then jazz musicians, probably the most famous would be Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. Probably heard of him. He's super famous. Someone you maybe not have heard of is Marcus Garvey. He started the United Negro Improvement Association, which advocated black pride and self-help and developed the ideas of black nationalism, which will become very popular in the 1950s and 60s. Black separatism, self-sufficiency, and a Back to Africa movement. So there it is, Pan-Africanism by Marcus Garvey. Values and conflict. Sharp divisions between the young and old, urban and rural, modernists and fundamentalists, prohibitionists versus anti-prohibition, nativists versus immigrants. So as there's this attempt to go back to normal, obviously things can never go back to normal, and there's lots and lots of really important changes happening. And this causes cultural tension. Religion, modernism. Modernism reinterpreted the Bible to account for evolution versus fundamentalism, which literally interpreted the Bible. So if in the Bible it says God created the world in 7 days, that's exactly how God created the world. So they take it word for word. Therefore, they would discount any evolution theories applied to humans. Revivalists on the radio. So the new medium of the radio was used by preachers to preach, to reach new audiences. One famous preacher was Billy Sunday, who attacked drinking, gambling, and dancing. There were some other ones too that attacked communism and other things. The Scopes trial. Scopes was put on trial for teaching evolution in Tennessee. So there was a law that said you weren't allowed to teach about evolution. He was a science teacher. He taught about it anyway. He was told to pay a fine. He took it to court. He got some famous lawyers, including none other than failed presidential candidate William Jennings Bryant and Clarence Darrow. He was found guilty but let off on a technicality. Prohibition, the 18th Amendment. As a result of of World War I, Prohibition was passed. It outlawed the manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol. Yeah, this did not stop people from drinking. Instead, they went to speakeasies and bought alcohol on the sly. They also bought bootleg or smuggled alcohol. They bribed cops to look the other way. They made gin in their bathtub, called bathtub gin, and it led to the rise of organized crime, mafias. Probably the most famous mafia man was Al Capone, who made millions, I tell you, and also led to gang violence as he tried to stop rival gangs. Finally, after I think 12 years, Prohibition was repealed by the 21st Amendment in 1933. FDR said, "What this country needs right now is a good $5 beer." $5, I meant 5-cent beer. Inflation, am I right? Nativism. Nativism, we learned about that during the Gilded Age. It was a fear of immigrants. What is causing the fear of immigrants? It's gotta be Sheesh, what an episode. It causes a fear of job competition, a fear of foreigners, and a red scare. Man. Quota laws. So in the 1920s, we're going to see that they're going to finally limit immigration. The natives get what they want, and the government passes the Quota Act of 1921 and the Quota Act 1924, which limits immigration to 3% of pre-World War I levels, and it basically stopped immigration from Asia and from Eastern and Southern Europe. Pretty much shut it down to only a couple thousand people a year instead of literally millions or hundreds of thousands. Canadians, Latin Americans were exempt and continued to immigrate to the United States, so it didn't apply to Canadians or Latin Americans. Sacco and Vanzetti were poor Italian immigrants and anarchists accused of murder and sentenced to be executed. Their trial became famous and was played out over all the newspapers. During the 1920s, the liberals protested their interests, but they were executed after 6 years of trials. They pretty much didn't have any evidence that they actually did this. Their main evidence was that they were poor Italian immigrants and anarchists. The KKK, or the rebirth of the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan, this is an expression of nativism. They hated black people, but they also hated Catholics, Jews, foreigners, and communists. So instead of just focusing on black people, which was, what the original KKK was about, and it was only located in the South, this really expanded the KKK to the west and to the north. They dressed in white hoods and burned crosses and terrorized people. They were very popular at first. You can find some pictures on the internet of them marching down Washington, D.C., but declined in the mid-1920s because of links to corruption and murder. Turns out they're really a terrorist organization. Foreign policy, the fiction of isolation. So isolationism was like what people wanted to go back to. They wanted to return to isolationism. This had to do with disillusionment with World War I, right? We did not get anything out of World War I. We just lost 50,000 people and spent $33 billion. So as a result, people they don't want internationalism anymore. So the U.S., an example of this is they do not join the League of Nations, right? The failure to ratify the treaty or join the League of Nations, they do take part in some disarmament conferences, so they're not really actually being completely isolationist if they're like participating in treaties. You see what I'm saying? But the treaties are to stay out of people's business. So there's the Washington Conference 1921, the Five-Power Treaty, where the big five powers of the world agree to balance their navies. The Poor Power Treaty, which is the respect for your territory in the Pacific Ocean. And then the Nine-Power Treaty, which is nine powers agree to respect the open door policy in China. And then just for something fun, the Catalog-Briand Pact, an ineffective promise that countries would not use aggressive force to achieve their national ends. Boy, did that not work. People signed it and didn't really mean what they said. Business and diplomacy. We're going back to the dollar diplomacy a little bit. Since we don't want to be isolationism, we're not going to do military expansionism or imperialism, but we will do some economic imperialism, especially in Latin America. So we negotiated for some oil properties in Mexico, military influence, but we continue to focus on investing heavily in Latin American countries. In the Middle East, oil is dominated by the British people because of the treaty and the land that they got after World War I in the Treaty of Versailles. But the United States does convince Britain to give us some oil drilling rights for U.S. companies because we got to have that oil. It's going to be a strategic commodity that we really, really need very soon. Tariffs. The Ford-McCumber tariff increases the tariff. As income taxes are going down, the government still needs to fund itself somehow, and it's also very pro-business. So European countries respond with their own high tariffs, and this turns out to be one of the causes of Great Depression, because when you have a high tariff, this discourages trade because it costs money to trade. As a result, fewer people trade. And this is going to cause the Great Depression because in the Great Depression, we're trying to sell our stuff to other people. It's very difficult when there's high protective tariffs. War debts and reparations. The U.S. emerged from World War I as a creditor nation, so we actually were letting other people borrow money from us instead of us borrowing money from them. What a turn of events. We lent more than $10 billion to the Allies. Harding and Cooling demand that those debts be repaid in full. This was impossible for the Allies, so Dawes comes up with a plan called the Dawes Plan, and it establishes a cycle of payments flowing from the United States to Germany and then from Germany to the Allies, and then Britain and France would use this money to repay the United States. So, United States was giving money or loaning money to Germany. Germany would give that money to England and France, and then that England and France would give the money back to the United States. It was a merry-go-round of money. And it actually works great. It works just fine until all of this falls apart with the collapse of the stock market in 1929, when these loans are called in, and then the United States won't have any money to loan to Germany anymore, and the whole system will fall apart. And the Allies, all of them except Finland, will not pay back their debt and just default. This is going to, another reason for the isolationists to say we should stay neutral in the lead up of World War One. We made it. That was a really, really long episode. Hopefully you learned lots and lots of things about the 1920s and the cultural tension. This concludes our episode. Until next time, A-Pushers, keep following and keep those comments coming and the likes. Appreciate y'all. Until next time, Mr. B, out.